So Frodo Baggins is a zebra-ridden elf that butchers halflings by the dozen. Yeah, that sounds about right. As the title of the video says, I grew up with the wrong Heroes of Might and Magic 4. I've never done reviews of Heroes games despite reviewing multiple Might and Magic games, mostly because I'm simply not very good at them and haven't properly finished a single game, despite playing them a bunch. There was more reason for me never finishing Heroes of Might and Magic 4 than me just sucking at the game, however. Before the time I had home internet or spoke any foreign language, the main way I would get my video games was through this one guy who would burn and sell pirated discs of films and games, which he very likely pirated himself from some Russian sources. And behold, I have the pirated Heroes of Might and Magic 4 CDs. Just look at that yellow grime they acquired over the years. Heroes of Might and Magic 4 Excalibur, to be precise. But what's the Excalibur part? Well, let's find out. I've gotten myself an external disk drive just for cases like this. Can't say I miss the obnoxiously loud sound of the discs being read, but it is nostalgic. Another nostalgic thing is having the installers that are supposed to be in Russian have the text completely broken and displayed either in question marks or every possible accented Latin letter. I was mind blown that I could still recall what some of these gibberish words were supposed to mean, just from the experience. This specific installer has the old school thing of displaying an image in the background, just these days it's a little too low res to cover the whole monitor. And it even has music. That really brings me back. The main menu looks all nice and proper. Kid me never knew that this was an unofficial bootleg of the game that has all the campaigns replaced with fan-made maps. The key artwork that you see is a piece made by Boris Vallejo. I have no clue if I'm pronouncing that right, which looks very similar to artworks from other Might and Magic games, in both style and technique. In fact, this guy's artwork was used for the Might and Magic 7 main menu. I guess the only giveaway is the kitsch looking Excalibur logo, which is just a generic font with an orange gradient. Kid me didn't know any better back in the day though. But before we dig deeper into the game, where did it even come from? An online search brings up multiple CD cover arts for the thing, so while it's hard to pinpoint who originally made this custom map compilation, I can look into who published it. Obviously the language alone points to Russia, although this one cover I found has a Ukrainian link on it. We'll come back to that. Let me set the scene quickly. If other Eastern European countries were anything like Lithuania, during the Soviet Union's reign, most Western import was strictly banned, which would include any early video games. After the Soviet Union's dissolution in 1991, its former members went into a Wild West capitalism mode due to there not being proper established rules or culture around regulating markets, and everyone did whatever they could to make the most profit possible. Most digital media would be pirated and distributed illegally, and eventually actual companies popped up that would sell bootleg copies of foreign video games. I bet most people who played a Slavjan game or two in the past know a company called Akela. Before the company switched to being a legitimate game publisher, it too dealt in pirated video games. Allegedly before the switch, a splinter of the company branched off and established Fargus, which ended up as the largest publisher of pirated games in Russia. But they would not only rip the CDs and resell them, they put a lot more effort into bootlegging. After a long time ban of foreign media, few people in the post-Soviet countries spoke English properly.
Zaikin, do you speak English?
Heck, it doesn't seem that different in the current day Russia either. But the point is that there was a demand for translations, and that's exactly what Fargus did. They would translate the games. In their early days they would even hire professional actors to do voiceovers, and then present the reward copies of the pirated games in new covers, branded with a Fargus logo, and quite often a gold medal as a guarantee of great quality. Fargus was one of the publishers I found distributing Excalibur, and boy did the covers look awful. According to oldgames.ru wiki, the quality of Fargus releases started dropping after the tragic death in a car accident of one of its core members, nicknamed Ivanhoe. Another factor was the rise in competition. After not receiving a bonus and getting mad about it, one of Fargus's employees, Vasily Drachuk, decided to quit the company and do the same thing on his own, and thus Seventh Wolf was established. Seventh Wolf quickly rose to become the second largest pirated game publisher in Russia, and Fargus's main competitor. At that point it became a free-for-all. Whichever pirate publisher would translate and release a game people are waiting for first would rake in the most cash. Both Fargus and the Seventh Wolf would also hire various translator teams to do the localizations, including GCC Game World, which is now known as Ukraine's largest game developer responsible for the Stalker and Cossacks series. In their younger days, they too were quite active in the video game bootlegging scene. Seventh Wolf would also keep trying to one-up Fargus. Seventh Wolf would release what they would call 1.5 versions, meaning they would add extra content, like a Russian voiceover, if a pirated release didn't have one yet, or a walkthrough, things like that. Or what's this? Diablo 2 Baldur's Gate? Those 1.5 versions sure could get wacky. Seventh Wolf would also take notice of Fargus's gold medals and would call their releases Platinum Editions instead. Seventh Wolf is the one that I saw releasing custom Heroes of Might and Magic 4 campaigns as full games the most, with Excalibur being one of those releases. There would also be some smaller pirate publishers I saw making their own CDs of Excalibur, like Master Media or Navigator. But they would be known for nonchalantly just making blatant copies of the bigger companies' releases, so they are hardly the original source. The interesting part to me is that despite both Fargus and Seventh Wolf and some of the other companies having websites where they would post announcements, patches and various other game-related things, the actual games would still be sold in physical format in various flea markets. They would design their own covers with a bunch of stolen assets, print them, burn and print covers on the actual CDs, package them in jewel case boxes, or sometimes even the later plastic DVD boxes, which all sound like a lot of effort and monetary investment. Judging by all that, the pirate scene in the early 2000s Russia must have been really thriving. Although, it's still common around these parts to get strange looks from people after telling them that I buy video games legally instead of just pirating. Oh, and if you think I forgot that one Ukrainian thing, I haven't. Now that we've learned about Seventh Wolf, we can deduce that the covers saying Platinum on them is their thing. So this copy, which looks the most professional and legit looking, must be one of theirs. The Ukrainian website in the corner is actually just a watermark of an online store, which appears to have sold actual legitimate games online. Which is interesting, because that would mean that these bootleg copies of Heroes of Might and Magic 4 that wouldn't even have the original campaigns in them had made their way to proper stores that would normally sell proper legitimate goods. So I still don't know exactly who compiled the Excalibur bootleg I own, but it could have been Fargus or Seventh Wolf with their attempts to do more, or it could have been someone else entirely who just managed to spread it in the right channels, that eventually made it all the way here to Lithuania. I hope that explains all the confusion of kid me thinking I was playing the real deal and not knowing better. Not only were the legitimate copies sometimes tricky to find, the bootleg ones had an entire widespread web of copycats. Also, I would absolutely love browsing through scans of these Russian bootleg releases. They would just look so perfectly awful. Not only would they pick some different art for the covers than the original version and over-design the hell out of it, but also bash a bunch of different IPs together. For example, what am I even looking at here? Heroes of Might and Magic 4? Lord of the Rings? A stolen Warcraft artwork? Anyway, let's get to the actual game. Before I dove into Excalibur, I thought it would do me good to play some of the original Heroes of Might and Magic 4, so I'd have a reference to compare the quality of the two releases. I still won't do a full review of the game and its mechanics, but here are my summarized thoughts on it. I like the soundtrack. I thought the writing was quite good. At first I didn't quite like the graphics and thought they were worse than Heroes of Might and Magic 3, but I got used to them. The game was simply made during that awkward period when games were slowly shifting to 3D. It still used pre-rendered sprites, but with the higher resolution and the isometric perspective, they looked a lot more 3D than in Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Some changes to the gameplay were pretty interesting. Having the heroes as actual battle units pushed the RPG side of the game a lot more, which I liked a lot. Town and unit management was different. Units now grew every day instead of just Mondays, which I thought was quite nice. There would also be more variation in town upgrades, with the same tier unit producing buildings being mutually exclusive. That paired with the lack of unit upgrades made there being less unit tiers overall, and it was faster to reach the max tier units, but the game required more strategy when choosing between different units in the same tier. I think that was a pretty cool change too, just for the sake of variety. The main thing I disliked was the difficulty. I don't claim to be good at the game whatsoever, but it felt to me like the balance was all over the place. In some of the campaign missions, I would be constantly attacked from multiple sides while only being allowed to have one hero myself, and it sometimes felt like the computer was cheating by replenishing armies quicker than I could. Even on the easiest difficulties I would have trouble, and without knowing the meta strategies, I would have to resort to cheating. At least that was convenient, because Heroes of Might and Magic 4 was still from that era of games that had cheat codes built in. I would think I suck at this genre of games overall, but then I'm not having such issues in something like Songs of Conquest, so make of it what you will. With all that out of the way, let's see what I have inside the actual game. This Excalibur release seems to be a compilation of not one, but 3 fan-made Heroes of Might and Magic campaigns. Those are The Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons, and Excalibur. There are more campaigns in the other bootleg releases, such as Alexander, but these are the ones I've got, so I'll only be looking into them for now and see how they tainted my childhood and already imperfect reputation of Heroes of Might and Magic 4. The game had some graphical glitches starting out, like the cursor leaving trails, some parts of the screen being black until I moved the cursor over them, or the entire screen flickering. None of those issues were present in the GOG release, but I easily patched them out using an OpenGL wrapper. Let's start with the Lord of the Rings campaign. It's easy to miss, but under the settings tab there are intros for each campaign that we can watch. The intro for the Lord of the Rings campaign is straight up just the first 7 minutes of the film that tell all about the rings. It has Russian dubbing, but it is on top of the original English voiceover, so you can hear both languages at the same time. It's a common practice to dub things this way in smaller countries, but I would imagine a country such as Russia would have demand for a proper dub for such a film. I guess there's always the Goblin version.
Давай. Дави на интернет. Ахтунг. Доступ разрешен. Теперь я. Пипин. Порно-сайт хакнули.
Там тетенька была. Без одежды, а с ней 3 дяденьки.
И что они делали? Говори.
Да они по-иностранному говорили. Я не все понял. Только ой, ой, ой.
Это ты самую суть ухватил.
Mission 1. On a long journey. Leaving his small town of Shire, Frodo could not even imagine what long and hard journey lies ahead of him. Starting out, Frodo is an elf hero, but we have a Haven town to control. It makes sense. Most of the troops in Lord of the Rings were human, and an elf was the closest thing out of the playable hero races. It's still funny that Frodo is this tough elven warrior that rides a zebra around. I would also like to note that some of the music has been replaced, and one of the combat themes is this flute track that I don't think I've heard before. And while it isn't straight up bad, and does fit a late 90s game fairly well, it feels too chill to be a battle theme. There's nothing too special about this mission. It's a small but fairly competently made map. Visually it was of similar quality to the official maps. Gameplay-wise, the map was divided into 2 parts, and I had to take over the town on the opposite side. It wasn't a very hard task. The first mission didn't give me much trouble at all. Young Frodo has proven himself to be a brave warrior and defeated the Death Knight. I don't recall any of that happening in Lord of the Rings, but sure. Let's move on to the second mission. Orcs attack. The caves of Mora lie ahead. It is unknown what awaits Frodo and his friends there. And yes, it's spelled Mora here, not to be confused with Moria. This time I'm assigned to a preserve town for some more fantasy vibes. Now this mission gave me a much harder time. Starting out I had little to no resources or troops, and I couldn't easily access resource producing buildings either. Frodo was fairly high level at this point, so all the damage dealing was on him, while several wolves were tanking some of the incoming damage. At some point during this mission, I encountered some halflings which I, as Frodo, unceremoniously slaughtered. That felt like one of the most tone-deaf things possible. After about 20 minutes of slowly inching through the map, I managed to capture another town, at which point things started to go a tiny bit faster. But at the same time, the enemy faction made its way to me, with a lot stronger army than I could possibly raise at the time. So that was my cue to start cheating. Like I always say, if the game is not being fair with me, I don't have to play fair either. After that it was the regular spiel of just having to capture the enemy towns in the underground layer. Overall, I'd say the layout of this map wasn't very well thought out, making the beginning of the mission unreasonably slow and giving the enemy an unfair advantage. There was also very little buffer zone, since my first town is right next to the stairs leading underground, and the enemy can attack it very quickly. Orcs are defeated, but there's still a long and dangerous journey onwards. Mission 3. Battle against Saruman's army. You have to endure the siege of Hamburg, and by going on the offensive, destroy Isengard. You heard it right, we are in Hamburg now. This is where the quality dips even further. The map is rather ugly, built in a very utilitarian way. There's a lot of repeating assets right next to each other, and everything is placed in very orderly lines. The map itself resembles a similar design to 2 fort maps in shooters, with there being 2 bases and a tight path connecting them. This time for whatever reason I command a stronghold town and have some max tier units right from the get-go. There's a lot of those trees with faces that level you up underground, but it would take several turns to visit every single one. This is also where the horror stories I've heard online came to fruition. This map is impossible to complete. To get to the enemy I need to pass a blue gate, but I only have access to teal Keymaster Tent. I can see it being easy to confuse the colors, but it's also an easy issue to fix, where the map tested at all. And trust me, I tried going everywhere. Shall I somehow beat this mission impossible, I would see this text. Saruman is dead, but the evil still remains. Mission 4. Last Fight. Sauron's right hand was defeated, but Sauron himself is still alive and a great danger for the whole world. Your goal is to gather the remaining forces and tear him down. The world's fate is in your hands. This mission felt all over the place. Not only was the map layout weird, but I also started out with 100 fairy dragons, which immediately made me nearly invincible. At some points I found it absolutely ridiculous how Frodo is commanding an army of dragons and can go out of his way to kill thousands of peasants. This map was larger than the previous one, but the way it was built didn't inspire much confidence that anything interesting would happen, so I kind of skipped the better half of it. Sauron and the Ring of Power are destroyed, so nothing else can evoke the Dark Lord again. Not gonna lie, I expected more from this campaign. After the official Heroes of Might and Magic 4 campaigns, I expected more dialogues and maybe some scripted, more RPG-like moments, but all the maps were just regular town battles between 2 factions with very little context in between. Now, on to Dungeons and Dragons. The intro seems to be ripped from one of the old D&D films. I'm not sure which one as I haven't watched them, but it has a more proper dub this time. I wouldn't be surprised if this campaign is based just off of the films and not actual D&D, because I highly doubt tabletop D&D was a popular hobby in early 2000s Russia. At least here in Lithuania, there weren't even really any places to buy D20 dice up until fairly recently. So in my teens I had decided to carve my own. I grabbed a random piece of wood, but it happened to be an oak one, which is incredibly hard to carve, so I ended up with just this mostly round ball. It has a little face on it. Mission 1. Vicissitudes of Fate. The sun has set. The dusk was gathering upon the Izmir Empire. A light breeze brought a long-awaited chill. Two young people were walking the wide embankment. They carried on a lively conversation. Apparently, one of them was trying to persuade the other one, but to no avail. Those two young people are Ridley and Snails. They are thieves. The discussion is about their next case. Ridley tries to convince Snails to rob the Mage Tower, but the latter fears another failure. Suddenly the bay near the embankment is brightly lit. The light is emitted by overwater gates of Profion's castle. More accurately, from the unusual red substance on the water surface. Nobody standing on the embankment knows that this substance is dragon's blood. The same dragon that Profion was experimenting on. Neither Ridley nor Snails knew that, but this exact moment became a turning point in the lives of the two thieves from Izmir. That's a lot more text going on here, but there were also at least 3 spelling and grammar mistakes in it, even in the title and characters' names. I immediately find a note saying that this is the first Heroes 4 map by someone called Drakon666. What little I've seen of this map seemed pretty detailed, but as soon as I ended my first turn, the mission was won. I have no clue what did it. I can only assume that the map is bugged. No wonder it's the dude's first map. Damodar was killed. This wasn't in the plans of Profion, and the one who got in the way of his best warrior and companion are a bunch of petty thieves. Alright, mission 2 then. Confrontation. Marina, wake up. The voice in the dream was getting louder and more persistent. Even if it was still far from dawn, it was the time to act. She was the only hope of the Mages Guild. It was going to be a hard day. So I got a completely different character this time, and a map that looked a little odd but was mostly functional. It was yet another 1v1 town fight, but the map was quite large with a lot of walking back and forth. Up until the very end, when I reached the enemy's town, I had very few challenges. Dealing with the enemies, however, proved to be a bit nasty, because the castle was behind a grey gate, and I couldn't get past it. Whenever I had a stronger army, the enemy would just cower inside, and I wouldn't be able to get close. The only way to deal with this I could think of was to lure the enemy out with a weaker army and just cheat again to win, since the map seemed a bit borked. I accidentally skipped the wall of text after this mission, so the ending overall was highly disappointing. Mission 3. The Earth Spirit. Elvin walked the horse and checked the stirrups. His journey would be a difficult one. What awaits us there, on our way to the Earth Spirit? It was yet to be found out. Again, I get another character control, and again, I have no clue what I did to win this one. I just went to some hut while exploring the map and it was suddenly game over. After talking with the Earth Spirit, Elvin started to act very strange. Something seems to be bothering him. Is it that unusual elf sickness that got him? I hope not. It would have been helpful if I had gotten any text like that telling that I'm actually looking for the Earth Spirit earlier, so I would know that that's the thing that would prompt the victory and that I don't really have to fight anyone in specific. Mission 4. In Search of Menonet. Rest assured, my translator is equally as confused about what Menonet means. I guess it's just some name. The dusty road stretches ahead. More spelling errors. There are no signs of the danger that lie upon the hill. Only the faithful horse occasionally shakes his head anxiously, but his owner does not pay attention to the horse's nervousness. He is stubbornly moving towards his goal. Yet another character, and at this point I was completely baffled as to what is going on. But I quite liked this map. It looked a bit amateurish, but it was actually fun to play. At first I captured a town that was near the center of the map, but then the same faction had 3 more towns in different edges of it, so I had to both attack and defend at the same time. It didn't feel too difficult either, but I was stumped once again when I was done capturing the towns. There was a town that belonged to a 3rd faction at the center of the map that I could see at all times, so I figured it would be important. However, it would have a wall around it and a purple gate. Whoever was in that town could not get out, but after exploring the whole map I couldn't get in either. There were some more grey gates and outposts around the map, but I couldn't find a way to get past them either. So it seems like this map also has some critical flaws that prevent it from being completed. If I were to somehow complete this mission, the end screen says, Elvin is still kind of weird. I can't help him with anything, but he laughs and is happy about something all the time. I don't know what to do, because I love him. This makes absolutely no sense to me, and I doubt it's because I had to use machine translation for this one. On to the next one. Alliance with the Barbarians. Yes, it is unlikely that we will be able to deal with this rebel on our own. An alliance with the Barbarians is the only incorrect solution. In this map, I instantly have a lot of spots visible, and it's another one of those that auto-win after the first turn. Peace has returned to the land of the elves. The epidemic has begun to subside. Glory to the heroes of might and magic. What a title drop. But wasn't it supposed to be Dungeons and Dragons? And that was the extent of the D&D campaign. Generally very underwhelming and mostly broken. Out of the 3 campaigns, this is the least coherent one too, in every way possible. Only one left now, and it is the main course, the titular Excalibur. This time the intro is a little different. It has a scene playing from the King Arthur film. Well, one of them anyway. I can't keep track of all of them. But the text that's scrolling seems to be different from the spoken dialogue. Let me read it out for you. Once upon a time... No, this is not right. You might think it a fairy tale, but it is not. There would be fairy tale characters in the story, there would be dragons, elves, mages and so on, and sorcery. In those times sorcery was a common thing, but as the time passes, everything changes in this life. So, where do we start? Let's start from the beginning. Those were horrible times. A human life was worth nothing, and the crown was changing one tyrant after the other, often the latter even more cruel than the former. Civil wars were tearing the country apart. When the Saxons came, they destroyed Christian churches and pagan shrines alike. Only one soul could help this world, a fairy from a magic land. Sounds like a pretty normal introduction, which given the context here, is quite the feat. Let's see what the first mission offers us. On the edge of war. The pre-dawn twilight had not yet cleared, but Arthur was already on his way. Today the young king woke up with the first sun. His soul was plagued by worry and turmoil. As it turned out, his fears were not in vain. A messenger came from the coast and reported a big group of Vikings already taking the town of York. Arthur was young, inexperienced, and had only a small amount of men to fight the invaders back. But he was protecting his land, and that invigorated him and his warriors. There was a sound of a blade being unsheathed, and a roar of delight rolled over the army. Excalibur was glowing under the rising sunlight. So, of course, I'm playing as Arthur, and I guess I have the Excalibur from the start, which I replaced within a minute with a sword that gives me better stats. I seem to have a leprechaun in my command, who is stranded on an island without anywhere to go. His only option is to fight an impossible battle and die. I think I remember this scene back from my childhood. Fairly early on I capture a stronghold too, where I can get behemoths. And getting behemoths for a Haven army together with angels to fight some other top tier units is another distinct childhood memory I have. Overall this map seems to be made competently enough. There's a lot to explore, seas to sail, a massive underground level. I capture some enemy towns, and eventually after I end one of my many turns, the mission ends. Possibly because there were no towns left to capture. The barbarian army was defeated. Drogorl himself, fled with a small number of his men. You won this fight, but not the war. There is a great battle ahead. I wasn't paying enough attention to tell if one of the enemies I fought was named Drogorl, but at least this sounds logical so far. Mission 2. In the Scottish Highlands. Encouraged by the victory, King Arthur's army keeps driving outlanders away from his land. In a few days they had covered most of Britain and found themselves in the north, in Scotland. But the barbarians were not the only danger here. This map often felt like a maze with all its narrow corridors and bridges, the winding pathways. I can't say that it reminds me of Scotland all that much. A characteristic of the maps in this campaign is that they tend to be really large. I don't want to say this map is necessarily bad, but the distances I need to cover while exploring and having to go back to my corner to restock troops really wore me out. After uncovering a good 50% of the map, I felt like I was spending a bit too much time on this one mission than I can allow myself, and ended up skipping it. Here's the end screen text. The Bloody Pack was defeated, but are there more enemies? There are still a lot of problems to deal with. Mission 3. The United Kingdom. After the defeat of the evil, another problem arose before the young king. Not wanting to submit to Arthur, the Scottish nobility together with Irish rebels organized a rebellion, causing turmoil amongst common folk. They put up numerous men against Arthur's army. Unfortunately, you have to accept the challenge. I must say, I'm quite enjoying these images paired with the text. Halfway through the D&D campaign they switched from film screenshots to old school fantasy arts, and they're working quite well, even though I don't know where they're unlawfully lifted from. This map seems a lot more open-ended than the previous one, but it's quite large too. At this point, I'm quite tired. After playing the original Heroes of Might and Magic 4, I was mostly looking forward to see if these campaigns will have any similar scripted dialogues and events, and it was enough for me to see that this one doesn't yet again. Skip. It finally happened. Brotherly nations are united in an unbreakable alliance. Mission 4. A stab in the back. On this victorious way home, Arthur learns that some of the Knights of the Round Table together with displeased mages entered into a secret conspiracy, of which the purpose was to overthrow the young king. The instigator of it all is Astral the Mage, the old foe of Arthur. Well, there will be no mercy for the traitors. This map felt like a dip in quality to me. The decorations were not nearly as good. There were quite a lot of repeating assets next to each other, and overall it gave this impression that, despite the recurring protagonist and decently enough written intros and outros, this campaign is made up from maps created by different people with different skills and design philosophies. Oh, also I start out with a black dragon in this one, for whatever reason. I guess it's just a rule of cool. A lot of blood was spilled on British soil, but it was not in vain. Traitors have no place in our country. Mission 5. Fight with the mages. As the previous confrontation showed, the mages are getting stronger. Those mages are the enemies of Merlin, a friend and mentor of Arthur. They are the dark sorcerers. There will be no peace on this land as long as warlocks continue to work their magic, poisoning the souls of people, captivating their minds. The leader of the Dark Brotherhood is Lord Santal, the most evil and powerful sorcerer in Britain, who commands the dead. Arthur will have to get into an uneven fight with him and his armies. This map resurges in quality again, and at the very least it's visually a lot more pleasing, looking as good as official maps. I start out with a black dragon again. Cool. But other than that, this mission just feels like more of the same, meaning mostly a waste of time. Britain is free. The enemies are defeated, and people are rejoicing. Arthur threw a sumptuous feast in the capital. I was at that feast, ate and drank whiskey. It ran down my mustache, but didn't get into my mouth. That's the story. It's kinda nice how it not only started, but also ended with some pretty classic fairytale phrases. Other than that, I could say that Excalibur was definitely the most playable out of the three campaigns, but I'm not that sure if that's high praise. I didn't seem to encounter something super game-breaking, and the writing was at least coherent this time. It's still nowhere near the quality of the official campaigns with the lack of scripted events and the tediousness of the large maps. It feels like something only hardcore Heroes of Might and Magic 4 fans who have absolutely nothing better to do would play. For example, Russians, or me and my dad in the early 2000s with no internet connection. Out of curiosity, I checked the game's credits, and at the very bottom there was a little addendum that this series of add-ons was made by Vlamar Studio, and that they're also looking for talented programmers, artists and level designers to collaborate with. Finally, an answer as to who actually made this. Although when I tried looking into what this Vlamar is, I found nothing. Or to be more precise, I found so much I couldn't tell if any of it was the one I needed. It didn't look like it, at least. Nothing related to Might and Magic or video games. The 3 campaigns aside, there are also a whole bunch of single scenario maps in this compilation, and every single one of them is lifted from some various random map makers. I had found a complete list of what the maps were called originally on Wiki, but I completely lacked the time and will to check every single one of them out to see if there's anything interesting. I came for the campaigns, I saw what I wanted, and I was left, unsurprisingly, mostly disappointed. Unfortunately, the list on Wiki doesn't say who the original authors of the campaign maps are, and that's what I'm the most interested in. In the end, it wasn't all that fun for me to play the Excalibur campaigns, but it was pleasant having a bit of a nostalgia trip about some vague memories from my childhood I had, seeing what all these things were for real, and the rabbit hole I was thrown into about the entire Russian bootlegging scene was incredibly entertaining. That's a certified Jankbaron experience. I hope you enjoyed watching and listening to me ramble about my discoveries, but now it's time to say goodbye. Thank you for watching, and see you in another video.